I think at this point right now, I'm just gonna talk about the history of not NADA itself, but the history of our Detox, how it came to be. The original grassroots reason that we started to do acupuncture in the United States for substance use, and how it relates to what we do today in harm reduction, and how it impacted in the opiate crisis, and how we use Detox to help communities heal with love and a non-judgmental approach, as opposed to many of the different types of modalities that they have, where they're, if you don't reach a certain objective, you fail. Hi everyone, my name is Juan Cortez from New York City, and I am currently here at On Point NYC, where I hold the position of the Holistic Health Services Manager. I also do work with the NYU, working with military veterans, and with Streetwork Safe Horizon, working with youth at risk. Today, I would like to talk to you a little bit about the history of Detox in the United States, how it connects to social justice and activism, and how we use it today in a harm reduction setting. So first of all, I would like to start with a little bit of a history of what was going on in the 60s and 70s, particularly around the country in poor communities. But we're going to focus right now on the South Bronx. And back in that time, it was like a revolutionary period. There was a lot of revolutionary movements going on, right? There was the anti-war movement, the gay rights movement, the women's rights movement, the civil rights movement, the counter-culture movement. But there was one movement that people don't really talk about so much starting back then, but still affects us today. And that was the anti-drug movement, or the war on drugs, and the Rockefeller laws. So those created a recipe for oppression. So what was happening is that in poor communities, just like today, were being neglected, and the services that people needed to be competitive weren't available to them. And there was some group of activists that realized this. They realized that in order to keep a population oppressed, you keep them sick. And if you keep them sick, you keep them silent. But in order for you to do that, you have to have a strategy or a recipe. So that strategy consists of flooding poor neighborhoods with drugs, and then making those drugs illegal for people to use, and punishing them for the drugs, and creating mass incarceration. And then you also deprive people of housing, education, healthcare, and all the entitlements, all the tools that people need to be productive and successful. And if you could accomplish that, you have a perfect recipe for oppression. So members of the Black Panthers, the Young Lords, and Dr. Mutulu Shakur from the Republic of New Africa, and many other groups realized this. And what they decided to do is they decided to create their own recipe to counter that, right? So they would start to breakfast programs for kids, so the kids could have free breakfast programs. They would work with radical doctors and open up health clinics. And particularly at that time, because poor neighborhoods were flooded with drugs, there was no holistic approach to substance use at the time. And the opiate crisis that has always existed in poor communities, people have always died from overdoses in poor communities, wasn't being really addressed, other than putting people on methadone programs without an end date. So people were pretty much put on a methadone program, and if you wanted any type of entitlements or help, you had to be on a methadone program with no detox available to you. So also, the conditions in the South Bronx, in the hospital, in Lincoln Hospital particularly, were horrific. It was called the butcher shop because people literally would die in the emergency room waiting to be seen by a doctor. The hospital received very little resources from the city to be able to provide the needed services. The building itself was actually condemned, but it was condemned for rich people and open for poor people. So members of the Young Lords took over the hospital out of protest to bring awareness to the conditions in the hospital, and they had some demands. And one of those demands is that they demanded a treatment program, right? They demanded universal health care, which we're still fighting for. They demanded universal pre-K, which New York has just initiated not too long ago for working parents. Also, they demanded a bill of rights, a patient bill of rights that wasn't available to people. People didn't know their rights as a patient before this. Now, when you go to the doctor and you sign your patient bill of rights telling you your rights as a patient, they fought for that. So these group of young activists were making changes that they thought were necessary to empower the community and to bring health and awareness to the community, right? But when they did open up Lincoln Detox, they were working with radical doctors and they were providing methadone and helping people get off methadone, right? But then once people got to a certain dose, they would go into withdrawals. So then Dr. Mutulu Shakur said that there needs to be something added to this. There needs to be a holistic approach. And somehow they came across an article on someone in there's different debates, Thailand, Hong Kong, that someone was receiving acupuncture for a condition, and the person was an opiate smoker, and that person was able to get off the opiates with acupuncture. And really, even the acupuncturist wasn't aware that the person was an opiate smoker until after. But this group of young activists read this and they said, this is amazing. We need to do this here. But remember, it was the 70s. Acupuncture schools weren't really a thing other than in California, which was the only state that licensed acupuncturists. And in New York, it was pretty much kept within the Chinese community in Chinatown. So it wasn't something that was available to many people or even very popular in the United States. But this group of young activists said, we need this here. So before they even started to use needles, Dr. Shakur would read books on acupressure, giving people ear massages, foot massages. And as people were coming through Lincoln Detox and they were being detoxed, they were giving back massages, ear massages, foot massages, and a whole lot of love. And I'm quoting Dr. Mutulu Shakur when he said that the main ingredient in the treatment was love, right? And eventually, they were able to go to California and see some of the acupuncturists there working, and they implemented one needle and in the ear when they came back home, and it was the lung point. The lung helps people with grief. And the thing about substance use many times is used to medicate trauma, is used as a coping mechanism. And when you ask someone to get off drugs or someone gets off drugs, that's a loss. When you stop using drugs, you've just lost your security blanket, because when you use drugs to medicate trauma, that's your security blanket. So that's a loss. But by placing that needle in the lung point, it allows you to let go. It allows you to let go of that grief. And that's the first point they started with. Eventually, they started to add more points, which eventually became what we call today the 5-point protocol or the NADA protocol. Of course, because this group of activists were seen as radical, they also were seen as enemies of the state. So being that they would educate people on their rights to be treated as human beings, and when the government would not help people, they took it upon themselves to help people, whether it was taking over a hospital, whether it was doing the garbage initiative here in Harlem. The garbage wasn't being picked up. It would be 90 degrees in August and the kids would be playing in the streets and the garbage would be piled up and the kids would get sick. And the young lords went to the city and said, you need to pick up the garbage more than once a week because our kids are getting sick. The city was like, there's no money in the funding, right? Out of protest, they took all the garbage that they could carry, threw it on 3rd Avenue, where all the rich people had to drive through to get home, and they set the garbage on fire. A few weeks later, the city was picking up the garbage. There was also a high rate of TB in poor communities and lead paint poisoning in the community. So the young lords went to the city and said something needs to be done about this. And it's great that you have these x-ray vehicles, because the city had 2 x-ray vehicles that they would park in affluent neighborhoods in the Upper East Side. And the young lords went to the city and said, hey, you gotta bring these vehicles over to the projects in Harlem. The city was like, they're parked where they're parked. If people want to get to them, they can. Out of protest, they liberated one of the trucks with the technicians inside the truck, drove it to the projects, and started giving people free x-rays as a follow-up TB test. So those are some of the things that they felt they had to do to make positive changes in the community, because they felt their voices weren't heard. They felt that that recipe for oppression was so deeply embedded into the community and into the country that no matter how often they raised their voice, the community was sick and their voices were silent. And they just wanted to give people a voice. And they used acupuncture and political education as a way to give people a voice. As people were starting to detox off of the opiates and off of other substances, they were being educated on their rights. And many people actually became providers of AcuDetox afterwards and counselors as a result of that. Now, of course, because they were radical, the city eventually started to get rid of them, and that's when Dr. Michael Smith was put into the director position in Lincoln Hospital. And Dr. Smith is accredited with calling the AcuDetox that the activists created and naming it NADA and taking it around the world, and where people around the world practice it now in all different types of settings, whether it's disaster relief, whether it's for trauma or substance uses, or just general wellness and stress is used all around the world right now. And Dr. Smith is credited with that. So I think that the credit has to be weighed even out with Dr. Mutulu Shakur and Walter Bosque and members of the activists from Lincoln Detox, and also Dr. Smith should be given credit for taking it around the world. So how does that work today, right? We know about the history of how it started, right? But how does that affect us today? We're still in an opiate crisis. There's still oppression. There's still poverty. There's still all the isms that exist in our country today and around the world today. There's still wars. There's still trauma. So how does AcuDetox address that? Well, it's quite simple. Dr. Mutulu Shakur said it best. He said that the main ingredient in this work is love. The needles that we use are just an extension of that love, right? So what we do is we create community, and we create healing in the community, because as we know, people who use drugs have been stigmatized and affected, but then the people in our community that don't use drugs have been traumatized by the drug laws and the conditions that are happening also. So the whole community suffers. So what we do here at On Point is that we open up our space, our clinic, to everyone in the community to come in. Whether you use drugs or not is not the question. The question is, how do we heal as a community? So when people come into our space, you'll have 10 to 15 people receiving the 5-point protocol, but each one of them is getting it for a different reason. You know, someone might be trying to detox off of opiates. Someone might be dealing with some trauma. Someone just might have stress because it's driving them crazy. And someone is really been affected by the conditions in our community and just needs a sanctuary to heal. And we all do this together. So when we place our hands on people, on their ears, that's a very powerful tool, because the human contact can be very powerful. One of the things that in my career, I've also realized that our participants, the vast majority of participants that come through with substance use disorder, their experience with human contact has not been very positive. They've either been sexually abused, physically abused, also, all of course, emotionally abused. And also when the police put their hands on them, is not to pat them on their back and tell them that they're a great person. It's to throw them in jail. So or they had to survive through sex work. So their experience with human contact has often not been very friendly. So when we ask people permission to place our hands on their ears, they're allowing us into their space. And when we place our hands on someone in a healing way, that is so, so powerful. And that is part of the healing process. And when the needles are placed, it's called the unspoken treatment, right? The unspoken treatment, because it addresses trauma, it addresses stress and anxiety, it addresses fear, it addresses anger, it addresses that fight or flight response without having to say a word, right? The love that you give and the needles are doing the work. The environment that you create is doing the work. I like to say that it is an amazing tool to have along with other tools like supportive counseling, mental health counseling, any type of other support that people need. Is one tool in a toolbox for people. Acupuncture is a tool, and people could use that tool along with any other tool that they have. And everyone's toolbox is a little bit different. The wonderful thing about that is that in harm reduction, we don't tell people what the tools that they have to use. And that's what kind of like makes us a little different than abstinent-based modalities, where they're told that these are the things that they have to do in order to be successful. And if you miss one of these milestones or one of these goals, you have failed. You are not clean. And those are stigmatizing words, and that is not, to us, a healing way. I mean, I'm not knocking abstinent-based treatments. For some people, it works very well. But when you force someone to do something, it never works. Or else we would not have mass incarceration of the drug laws right now. And people would not be making millions and millions of dollars off of the opiate crisis and mass incarceration. So that being said, when in harm reduction, what we do is we offer people tools. Like in On Point NYC, we have what we call a one-stop shopping. In the drop-in space, when they come in downstairs, the first thing we do is we greet them, and we have food for people. We have a safe place where they could just sit and not have to worry about somebody coming behind them and knocking them over the head with it because they're trying to sleep on the street. We have showers, we have washing machines, we have 3 meals a day that we provide. We have mental health counselors right downstairs on the spot. We have peer counselors on the spot. We have the first sanctioned OPC in the United States, where people can go in the back and they can utilize either intravenous drugs or smoke with a trained team there to respond to an overdose. When there's been close to over $70,000, over 70,000 usages in the 2 years that we've been open, and not one death in the OPC. We've reversed over 1,000 overdoses. That means 1,000 people are alive today because of that OPC. So how does that work with acupuncture, right? When people utilize the OPC downstairs, and they after they use the OPC, they could come upstairs to the holistic space and receive an acupuncture treatment. Because some people are just not ready for abstinence. Some people are just not ready to stop right now. And so this non-judgmental approach that we offer with love, if somebody comes through the door and as long as they are able to receive the treatment and follow direction and sit still with needles in their ear, they're welcome to stay and receive treatments. We don't care if a person is actively using. We don't care if a person is homeless. We don't care about any of those things. What we care about is that that person is loved and treated as a human being. The reason that I do this work is because I have life experience in this work. And I really recommend that people see a documentary made by Mia Donovan. It's called Dope is Death. and it's free on YouTube, and that tells the whole history of Lincoln Detox and the activists. And also I'm featured in the film, and I tell my story in the film. Uh, the fact is that that harm reduction and Acu Detox have saved my life, and all I'm doing is just passing on what was passed on to me, just like many other people around the world are doing. I combined several things. I was fortunate enough to have a family that supported me and and helped me through my process. I was also very fortunate to have been able to be a participant at this center and receive support here. And then when I wanted to, when I felt that I was in the direction that I wanted to be a provider, they sent me to trainings. They put me in the volunteer program. They worked really well with me as I was even coming off methadone and using acupuncture and practicing Tai Chi and just learning. I had support on that part. So and of course, then I was also an outpatient at Lincoln Detox or Lincoln Recovery Center at the time, where Dr. Smith was the medical director at the time, and I was doing a combination of volunteering here and getting trainings to be a provider and receiving acupuncture treatments there, and also being part of their support groups and things like that. So I just did exactly what I mentioned before. Is I was offered some tools, and I started to gather tools and put them into my individual toolbox that worked for me. And then if some tools didn't work, I just discarded those tools and then just added a new tool. And to this day, 18 years later, I'm still discarding and adding tools. And one tool that I always keep in my toolbox is acupuncture. First, I like to say, like, people always ask me, what's the measure of success that you see when people come for treatment? And the answer is really simple to me. Success to me is when someone walks through the door, right? I don't measure success on as far as like, do they become abstinent? Do they start providing? If they walk through the door and they start receiving treatments, that's a success to me. In my particular case, I fell in love with acupuncture, receiving it, and it worked. I felt it was like so soothing and calming for me, and it was just something that I said I even try to go out of my way and get it twice or three times a day when in between groups. I would just go into the acupuncture room at Lincoln Recovery and sit there. They were like, "You're back again?" And I was like, "Yeah, hit me up." But yeah, I just fell in love with it. And then when I was given the opportunity to be trained, I just fell in love with that. I fell in love with just seeing people heal, and and also being able to create a space for people. And it's a beautiful thing. And I think that also, I think the only reason, one of the reasons that I'm successful in doing this kind of work, and is I just took the skill set that I had to survive on the streets, and I just applied that into what I do today. So I'm able to create clinics, do outreach, reach out to people, and go into, we'll go inside the a shooting gallery where people are getting high, and I'll offer people beads as they're getting high. Like, I don't have any problem with doing things like that, because that's all I've known in my whole life. Like I said, I just took those skill sets I had, and I just converted it to something that I see as positive and helping someone else. It's 18 years. I'm still not stopping yet.